Hey, y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my King County real estate market update for April 2025. Well, we're just wrapping up Q1, and we've had a really exciting past week or so in the stock market and in general with the economy here in the U.S. And even as we're talking, the market is shifting rather dramatically in the upward direction versus the downward direction. Mortgage rates fluctuated, have actually risen just a little bit. Today's Mortgage News Daily survey was 6.95 for a 30-year fixed rate, so still hovering right around 7%, a little bit more than where rates were over the past few weeks. But the general consensus here, as we started off the spring market, is that the market's been picking up here in the general Seattle area and in King County specifically. We've started to see more and more multiple offer scenarios. And even with everything going on in the past week, I'll show you towards the end that the market didn't change too much as far as housing goes. Now, of course, people see the news and it can cause fear in the housing market, but ultimately the stock market and the housing market are not the same thing, and they don't thankfully move at the same speed. And we're already seeing a pretty quick bounce back in the stock market with some different news, right? News and information driving the stock market, whereas we're seeing rates and inflation more driving on the housing market side, and demand, right? Supply and demand. And right now we're seeing that the housing market is still kind of chugging along the normal spring path, even with all the news over the past week. Each month in these updates, we're going to look at the numbers, right? In King County, we'll compare month over month and year over year. So as we're looking at the new listings, we're seeing quite a bit more new listings in King County, almost 2,500 new listings in King County. That's 24.3% more than the same time last year. We're just under 2,000 new listings in 2024, and month over month, pretty big jump there, more than 600 more new listings. What you would expect in the spring, start to see those listing numbers climb. I think the biggest thing that's catching my attention is the 24% more from last year. As we're looking at pending sales, we're seeing those increasing as well, getting closer to 2,000 pending sales for the month, 1,929. That's 13.5% more than last year, right? And again, year over year is our best comparison metric, and we're seeing an uptick month over month, which is good. That's what you want to see. More listings coming on, more listings selling. And as we're seeing the closed sales also increasing in March as well, and slightly down year over year, actually. But again, most of the closed sales would have been sales from February pendings, right? So we're seeing an uptick here in those pending sales. I would expect if we're seeing an uptick in pending sales this month, that we'd also see an uptick in closed sales in April when we start looking back at the April data. Days on market, about the same as last year, 1 day less on market for March, and also down 8 days, 30 days last month, 22 days this month. So we're seeing an uptick in the days on market. Median sales price is also up month over month and 4.3% year over year. $989, $950 in King County, getting close to that $1 million median sales price. And the average sales price is jumping up. So we're $1,273,343, only 2%. 2.1% up from last year, but still seeing that trend upwards on the average, and a big jump from last month. And these numbers are all, right, the average sales price, median sales price, these numbers are all changing every single month. And looking back, it's nice to be able to look back at the year and kind of see what the totals are. But right now, what we're able to look at is how did this year compare with last year, right? This time of year, typically the beginning of the spring is the beginning of the hot time of the market. Usually somewhere between March and June is when you see the highest prices for the year. Some of that's affected by some higher end listings coming on the market or selling, but some of those sell random times throughout the year. So I wouldn't say those are huge factors, but we get to kind of see how the market moves up and then generally moves down in the fall into the winter. But right now we're kind of in that prime time to be listing a house. there's still also not as much inventory or options for buyers in the market, which is why we're seeing competition. 2.7% over asking price on average in King County. And that's slightly down from last year, 3.1% over asking price, but it is up from last month at 2.3. So seeing a little bit more competition. The amount of inventory, though, is ticking up. 1.5 months of supply, which is quite a bit up from last year at 1.1 in March. So last year we were seeing more of a choke on the inventory, and we're seeing more coming on this year than last year. We're seeing more sales this year than last year. And we're also seeing more inventory month over month, right? Last month, 1.3 months. This month, 1.5 months. So as I'm looking at all this, I'm just seeing there's more supply building. We're seeing the competition right now. And I mentioned earlier in the year, I thought that we might see some of the competition be earlier in the spring and might taper off a little faster this year than it did last year or the year prior, especially if the interest rates remain where they're at. So I guess we're still waiting for later in the spring and the summer. So we'll see if that prediction's correct or not. But as I'm looking at the data, I'm seeing signs that it may be. Right. We're seeing a lot of activity right now, but we are starting to see the inventory building earlier this year than last year. And that is usually a sign when we start to see more inventory that we're going to see less competition because there's more options for buyers to choose from. And something we've been doing on a weekly basis in the market watches is we've been looking at what the market's doing in a smaller snapshot. So if we look at the data here over the last week and a half or so on the unpublished sales, which is something we added last month, we're seeing the prices a little bit lower than where they were, 967, 500. It's only a week into the month, so this changes every single week, but just the snapshot that we have right over the last week. We're seeing 3% over asking price in King County over the past week. Again, about the same as what we saw last month as a whole. If we look at the pending sales with multiple offers, we saw 42% since the beginning of the month. If we look back at the end of last month, 40% were experiencing the multiple offer scenarios. We're actually seeing an uptick in the multiple offer scenarios in King County as a whole. Pendings with inspection addendums, 29% versus 30%. Again, pretty much the same here. We saw 60% with financing addendums over the past 9 days. We saw 58% at the end of March. And we're seeing with escalation addendums, 21% versus 20% having escalation addendums. And this is all, again, with all the stuff happening in the stock market over the past week. We're still seeing the housing market in a similar place. So not too much has changed in spite of all the news, the stock market changes and fluctuations. And I think that's good to be able to share that. This is the real data here over the past 9 days as we've been experiencing some of this firsthand. And as we're looking towards the rest of the month, I would expect that this month will continue to be relatively competitive in King County. And as we head into May and June, if inventory starts to rise, I think that we might see some of this competition leveling off a little bit. But right now, it is tough to be a buyer, depending on where you're buying, right? But I think it's pretty tough to be a buyer right now. And there is generally competition for most of the listings. And if you are selling, there's still a window here, I think, where you have the opportunity to cash in on some of this competition. And that's not to say that selling at some point later in the year is bad, but right now you have some of that frenzy going on right now in the housing market. So some thoughts as we wrap everything up. If you have questions about the King County housing market, how all of this information might apply to you, feel free to reach out to me in the comments. And I'm also happy to connect with you on the phone as well.